Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the strangest chapters of World War II history, one that involves bitter survival, questionable recipes, and chocolate bars so awful that soldiers prayed not to find them in their rations. Yes, we're talking about the invention of military chocolate, the kind that doesn't melt in the sun but might just melt your will to live. Imagine being thousands of miles from home, under enemy fire, cold, exhausted, and the only comfort you're given is a chocolate bar designed to taste like disappointment. That's not a joke. That was by design. You're about to walk the sandy roads of North Africa, the snowy fields of the Ardennes, and the sweaty jungles of the Pacific, all with a half-melted brick of punishment chocolate shoved in your uniform pocket. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing who's falling asleep to this madness around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You never imagined your first mission would be like this. You're not on a battlefield. Not yet. Right now, you're in a noisy assembly hall in 1941, sitting on a hard bench with a clipboard in your hand. You were supposed to be signing up for aviation mechanics school, or maybe clerical work. Something respectable and clean. But instead, a sergeant with a mustache like a broom leans over and says, "You're getting shipped out, and you'll need chocolate." Wait, what? That's how it starts. Not with a gun, not with a uniform, but with a candy bar. The military, in its infinite logic, decides that soldiers need a chocolate ration, but not just any chocolate. Oh no, they want one that can survive 120 degrees heat, won't melt in a pocket during a 20-mile march, has at least 600 calories, and most importantly, won't be so tasty that you'll eat it all at once, because the military doesn't want to give you comfort. They want to give you calories with regret. Enter the D Ration Bar, a chocolate bar engineered by scientists, not chefs. You might think chocolate is a treat. The army thinks it's a tool, like a wrench or a landmine. You don't know it yet, but that bar will be stuffed into your bag before every march, every drop-off, every god-forsaken field assignment. It'll become your best, worst friend. The thing you carry for months, never eat, until you're desperate enough to try, and when you finally do, under a tree in Italy, or in a foxhole in Bastogne, you'll bite into it like it owes you money, and you'll learn the first rule of military chocolate. It isn't made to be liked. Historians still debate who thought this was a good idea. Some say General Hershey himself approved the specs, though, to be fair, that's the company, not a smiling candy mascot. Others argue it was a government nutrition panel, driven more by science than soul. But either way, the mission was clear. Make a chocolate bar so tough, so dense, that it doubles as food, fuel, and self-defense. Yes, really, there are stories of soldiers using the bars to prop up broken gear, or wedge open tank hatches. It's the only chocolate in history that could be mistaken for a building material. And here's a curious bit you'd never expect. The original bar was so dense that you couldn't bite into it unless it was warmed. Most GIs ended up shaving slivers off it with a knife, like they were dealing with Parmesan cheese. Others would drop it in boiling water to turn it into a kind of sad, hot cocoa. Spoiler, still terrible. Still, there's something weirdly comforting about it. That little brown rectangle, wrapped in waxy olive drab paper, becomes a constant in the chaos. You might hate it, but it's yours. Like a pet rock, only with more fiber. You'll soon learn that some soldiers love it. Well, love is a strong word. Let's say tolerate it with bitterness. Others hoard it like currency. But most trade it for anything else. One guy you'll meet in camp swears he traded 3 D Ration bars for a French cigarette and a half-eaten tin of peaches. Absolute robbery. But in the trenches, That's high finance. And as you watch the guys around you unwrapping their bars, sniffing them like they're checking for explosives, one thing becomes clear. You're not alone in your chocolate-based suffering. You're part of a generation of young men forced to march into war with chocolate, designed not for pleasure, but survival. Chocolate that cracks your teeth before it feeds your belly. Chocolate that, somehow, makes you stronger by making you suffer a little first. Because hey, what's more military than that? You find yourself standing in a dusty field camp somewhere in Louisiana. It's sweltering. Sweat drips down your back, like someone tipped a glass of lukewarm cola into your shirt. The air smells like diesel, gun oil, and the faint tang of fear wrapped in boredom. And then someone hands you a chocolate bar. Or so they claim. You stare down at the thing in your hand. It's wrapped in plain, no-nonsense packaging. Olive drab, block letters, no frills, no golden foil, no cartoon mascots, no promises of nougat or caramel. Just 3 simple words. U.S. Army Field Ration D. This, apparently, is your new best friend, or worst enemy. You peel it open. It looks like chocolate. Kind of. But it has the sheen of a wax candle and the smell of something you'd find in a barn after a long summer. You brace yourself and take a bite. Crack. Your molars protest immediately. It's not chocolate. It's a compacted blend of cocoa powder, oat flour, and sugar, pressed together with enough force to crush a man's spirit. The texture is dry and gritty, like someone mixed hot cocoa, mixed with sawdust, and forgot the hot water. And you think, they made this on purpose? Yes, they did. Because in 1937, the U.S. War Department issued an official request to the Hershey Company. The bar had to be heat-resistant, high in calories, and, this was key, only slightly better than a boiled potato. That's not a joke. That's the actual benchmark they aimed for. Why? Because soldiers in the field needed energy, not dessert. If it tasted good, they might eat it all in one sitting, and if they ate it all at once, they wouldn't have it when they actually needed it. So, they engineered misery by design. Imagine the boardroom where that conversation happened. Make it healthy, make it durable, and whatever you do, don't let them enjoy it. The man behind the madness was a food chemist named Samuel Hinkle, a genius in the lab, cursed with the unenviable task of designing what would later be called the most hated candy bar in history, and he nailed it. To his credit, Hinkle did make a bar that wouldn't melt in tropical heat. It could survive inside a soldier's pack in the deserts of North Africa, or on the decks of Navy ships in the blazing Pacific sun. It could take a drop from a plane and hit the ground intact. In fact, it could probably be the plane. One soldier said it best. You don't eat a D-bar, you negotiate with it. Even the Army's own official manual described it as an emergency ration to be consumed slowly over a period of 30 minutes. And that's if your teeth were in top form, which they often weren't. Dental hygiene in field conditions wasn't exactly stellar, and trying to chew the bar was a good way to test just how loose that back molar really was. Curiously, the D-bar had one unexpected upside. It didn't spoil quickly because of its dryness, lack of fats, and absurd density. It could last years in storage. Some were found still edible, in theory, long after the war ended. Historians still debate whether that counts as an achievement or a warning. But here's the kicker. The bar wasn't just meant for you, the soldier. It was also a message to your body, to your instincts, even to the enemy. It said, you're not here for comfort, you're here to survive. And in its own twisted way, the bar worked. Soldiers carried it on patrols into battle, across oceans and continents. It wasn't delicious, it wasn't nostalgic, but it was there. It gave you calories, it gave you energy, and in a strange, backhanded way, it gave you focus. Because you could be freezing, starving, exhausted, but at least you didn't have to think about what to eat. The D-Bar had already made that decision for you. That said, Some enterprising troops did try to improve it. You remember a guy in your unit named Lucky, who always claimed he could cook anything, anywhere. He would mash the bar into boiling water with powdered milk and instant coffee. The result? Something between chocolate oatmeal and regret. Another guy swore by crumbling it into a pan with butter packets stolen from a mess tent to make a kind of field brownie. It didn't taste better, but at least it didn't break teeth. And yet, despite all this culinary innovation, one thing remained true. No one actually liked the D Ration Bar. It was an obligation, a test, a rite of passage. One day you watch a private take a bite, shake his head, and toss the rest into the mud. Another soldier immediately scrambles over, picks it up, and brushes it off. Waste not. There's a quiet, collective understanding about this thing. You all hate it, but it's your hate. Shared misery, wrapped in wax paper. Eventually it becomes a kind of badge of honor. You survived another day, another march, another week in a foreign country, and the bar is still in your pocket, half-eaten, teeth marks across the corner, slightly sticky from sweat. It's not just food. It's a symbol of a war that's fought not only with bullets and bombs, but with small, bitter sacrifices, one bite at a time. You're back in camp, sitting cross-legged on your cot, with the infamous bar in your hand, wondering once again why something so small can feel so heavy. It's like holding a moral decision in candy form. You stare at it, thinking, who did this to me? Well, let's meet him. His name is Captain Paul Logan. And no, he's not a chocolate-hating villain. Quite the opposite. He's the military's top food expert during World War II. A man tasked with one of the oddest culinary missions of the century: create a chocolate bar that doesn't taste good. In 1937, Logan approaches the Hershey Company, which by then is already famous for its sweet, creamy milk chocolate bars. You know, the ones that make children smile and grandmothers proud. But Logan walks in and says, essentially, "Hi, we'd like you to make chocolate, but please make it terrible." And Hershey's chief chemist, the aforementioned Samuel Hinkle, says something like, "You want what? This is not a normal food design meeting. There are no mood boards or flavor profiles. Instead, there's a strict list of undesirables. Must not taste so good that it's eaten casually. Must not melt under battlefield heat. Must be a nutritional powerhouse. Must be nearly indestructible." So, Hinkle heads into his lab and performs what can only be described as culinary sabotage on purpose. He experiments with oat flour to bulk it up, cacao powder for bitterness, sugar for density, and a hardening agent that may or may not have been borrowed from Roman concrete recipes. The result? A dense, waxy cube of despair. He tests the bar in a furnace, then in his car dashboard, then, rumor has it, in a drawer full of sand for 3 weeks. Historians still argue whether Hinkle was proud of his invention or just relieved that no one tried to kill him over it. But the result was the D Ration Bar, and by 1941, it was shipped out to soldiers like you across the globe. Here's a strange fact. Some bars were coated with talcum powder inside the wrapper. Why? To keep them from sticking in extreme heat. Think about that. You're out there fighting for freedom and dignity, and your food is dusted like a baby's bottom to survive the sun. Even weirder, Hinkle originally wanted to flavor it with cinnamon or mint to make it more palatable, but the military rejected both ideas. Apparently they feared it would make the bar too pleasant. They were really committed to the "you will eat this only if desperate" branding. You'd laugh if it weren't true. You learn all this weeks later from a supply officer who used to work as a school teacher. He tells you how proud the Army was of the bar, how they saw it as revolutionary. And technically, they were right. It was heat-resistant. It was packed with calories. It could survive drops from planes, shipping delays, desert heat, and winter frost. In lab conditions, it was perfect. But here in the field, out here in reality, let's just say there's a reason soldiers carried it next to their canteen, because nothing dries your mouth out faster than biting into a compressed bar of chalky sorrow. And yet, you start to notice something. This little bar, this disappointing block of shame, shows up everywhere. In foxholes, in trenches, on aircraft carriers, even stuffed into paratroopers' jumpsuits. It's universal. You meet a guy from the 101st Airborne who swears he chewed on his D-bar the whole time he floated down from the plane into Normandy. He says it calmed his nerves. You meet a Navy signalman who tells you he used the corner of his D-bar to etch a girl's name into the side of a bulkhead. Because love, apparently, finds a way. And one night, under a star-pocked sky, in some nowhere town in Sicily, you and a friend both unwrap a bar, take a bite, make the same face, and laugh. You can barely chew. You're exhausted. You miss home. But for 1 second, you're together in it. The shared taste of regret is strangely comforting, and that's the twisted genius of the thing. The bar isn't about taste, it's about survival. It's about the knowledge that even when the world around you is falling apart, there's one constant. A flavor so bad, it feels like a bad joke told by a very serious man. Eventually, it becomes tradition. You don't eat it for calories anymore. You eat it for the story. You'll tell your kids about it. You'll bring one home and put it in a drawer for years. You'll pull it out one day, sniff it, and remember the heat, the marches, the fear, and the chocolate. Because the war gave you a lot of things, most of them heavy, some of them painful, a few of them absurd, and none more absurd than a bar designed to outlive your appetite. You're sitting under a tattered tarp, with rain tapping rhythmically overhead, trying to chew another bite of that D Ration Bar, and wondering, why does this taste like flavored gravel? It's not dramatic, it's honest. The D-Bar wasn't just not great, it was actively unpleasant. Soldiers across every theater of war developed a sort of reverent hatred for it. They called it things like Hitler's Revenge, or the last meal of the condemned. You laugh at the nicknames, but it's the kind of laughter that comes from shared trauma. Let's break it down. On paper, the bar had 4 main ingredients: sugar oat flour, cocoa fat, basically cocoa butter, and a dash of vanilla. Sounds decent, right? But once you compress those into a brick that could bounce off concrete, something dark happens. The sugar doesn't soften it. The cocoa doesn't taste like chocolate. The vanilla gets lost in the staleness. It's like biting into the memory of a brownie. Even worse, the bar absorbed smells. If you kept it near your socks, it tasted like socks. If it was stored near motor oil, common in field kits, it might carry a hint of synthetic bitterness. One guy said it tasted like chocolate, if chocolate had lost all hope. But the texture, that's what really breaks you. It starts with a resistance like you're chewing on dry clay. Then it crumbles, not pleasantly, but like brittle dirt. No melt, no smoothness, just chunks of grainy matter that stubbornly cling to your teeth like an ex that doesn't understand boundaries. And because of its high fat content and low moisture, the bar didn't dissolve. It just stayed in your mouth, in your soul. Some soldiers figured out how to get creative. They shaved it into their coffee, mixed it with condensed milk, or buried it in canned fruit, hoping the syrup would soften it. Sometimes it worked. Most times, it didn't. One corporal in your unit tried to soften his bar with steam from a boiling helmet full of laundry water. He swore it improved the taste. He also got dysentery. Coincidence? Maybe. And yet, despite its failing, or perhaps because of them, the bar stayed. It was cheap, shelf-stable, and nearly impossible to destroy. You start hearing rumors that tests were conducted to see if it could double as shrapnel-proof armor. No confirmation, but no denial either. Historians still argue if the taste was an oversight or deliberate cruelty. Some believe the army simply didn't prioritize flavor, assuming soldiers wouldn't care in the middle of combat. Others suggest it was strategic, make it so unappetizing that men would ration it over days, as originally intended. You begin to believe it was revenge. Revenge for every soldier who ever complained about field rations. You think canned beef stew is bad. The quartermaster whispers from the shadows, handing you a D bar with a grin. Try this. You meet a chaplain who once held up a D bar during a sermon and told the unit, "This is proof that hell exists on Earth." No one laughed. Too true. Still, there's a peculiar consistency to it. You always know what you're getting. No surprises. In a war full of chaos, that's oddly valuable. It becomes less food, more ritual. You eat it in small bites during watch. You nibble on it during long marches. You chew it slowly on lonely nights when sleep won't come, and the only sound is your own heartbeat. And every time, it's just as bad, but strangely, comfortingly bad. You start hearing legends. One says General Patton tried the bar once and spat it out in front of his aides, declaring it an edible insult. Another says some units buried theirs in the dirt, hoping the enemy would find it and surrender out of sympathy. And then there's the tale of a private in North Africa who used a sharpened D bar to carve his initials into a tank. That one, at least, is confirmed. You saw the letters yourself. You can't help but wonder, is it really that bad? Or is the memory of taste distorted by war? The thing is, taste is tied to memory. And out here, where so little is under your control, that little brown brick is burned into your sensory record. Someday, decades from now, someone will offer you a protein bar or a chunk of survival food. And as soon as you bite into it, dry, bitter, over-processed, you'll feel a strange, quiet ache in your jaw, a ghost of chocolate past, and you'll smile, because even awful things can make you feel alive. You're huddled around a small, smoky fire with 3 other guys. It's late. You're exhausted. The air smells like wet canvas and burnt ration. Someone pulls out a bar from his kit. No, not that bar. A real one, wrapped in shiny civilian foil, slightly melted but unmistakably actual chocolate. He holds it like treasure. "How the hell did you get that?" someone asks. He just shrugs. "Traded for it." And suddenly everyone's leaning in closer, like moths to a forbidden flame. Because while you're stuck gnawing on compressed bitterness, some soldiers, usually the lucky ones near towns or supply posts, figure out ways to smuggle real chocolate into the war. Sometimes it's a care package from home. Sometimes it's a trade with locals, or a quiet deal with a supply guy who knows a guy. And other times, it's pure theft. A supply crate goes missing in the chaos of the front, and suddenly half the unit has chocolate fingers and suspiciously happier faces. You remember one guy in your platoon, nicknamed Cheeks, thanks to his constant stash of gum and contraband candy. He somehow always had a ration of real Hershey bars, the kind with snap and sweetness and joy. No one knew how. He never told. One night, he bartered half a bar for a pair of dry socks. The deal was accepted instantly. In that moment it became clear. Chocolate was currency, and the D Ration Bar, monopoly money. The contrast between the real thing and the military version is staggering. The civilian bar melts smoothly on your tongue. It's soft, creamy, sugary. Everything the D bar isn't. Even a stale Hershey's from the bottom of a duffel bag makes you want to write poetry. In your head you do. Ode to cocoa, soft and sweet, not like the brick that broke my teeth. There's something almost sacred about those black market bites, not just because they taste better, but because they remind you of home, of freedom, of the civilian life you left behind when they shaved your head and gave you a uniform. Historians still debate whether allowing real chocolate in the field was wise. Some say it softened soldiers. Others argue it boosted morale in ways no speech ever could. And in truth, it did more than that. It revealed the strange paradox of military logic. Because here you are, being handed the most joyless form of chocolate ever engineered, while a Hershey bar sits in vending machines and general stores back home. Soldiers were this close to something delicious. But instead, the army said, No, you get the chalk. It wasn't just America, either. British and Canadian troops had their own rations, and while not gourmet, many were far more edible than the D Bar. The British even had Cadbury chocolate rations, wrapped like a gift, subtly patriotic, and actually pleasant to eat. You remember one day, a British unit camped near yours. They passed around tea and biscuits and, yes, Cadbury bars. One bite, and you considered switching allegiances. The chocolate had depth, layers of sweetness and texture. You could taste humanity in it. Your sergeant called it soft food for soft hands. You called it hope. And then there were the civilians. Little kids would sneak up to camp, offering eggs, bread, fruit, whatever they had, in exchange for real chocolate. Sometimes even asking for the D Bar. They hadn't learned yet. They still believed anything labeled American chocolate was a treat. One time, a French boy took a bite, paused, and politely handed it back. Even a child knew. Still, even the most hated things have their defenders. There was always that one guy, probably from Wisconsin, who insisted he actually liked the D Bar. He called it efficient, said it reminded him of something his grandmother used to bake during the Depression. You respected his commitment. You also stopped sharing meals with him. By the end of the week, someone in your squad has a full stash of black market candy. How? You don't ask. But you know that man now wields real power. In war, food isn't just sustenance. It's memory, emotion, leverage. Chocolate, of all things, becomes a connection to comfort, to sweetness, to something normal. Even if that sweetness is just 2 bites of a melted bar from a French village 8,000 miles from home. So you chew your chalky D Ration Bar with quiet acceptance, dreaming of nougat and almonds and things that don't come vacuum-sealed with a military serial number. And when someone hands you a piece of real chocolate, just a sliver, you don't say thank you. You just nod, because in this place that's how you say, "You saved me." Just a little. It's the kind of heat that warps metal. You're crouched in a crater somewhere in the Pacific, your uniform soaked with sweat, skin tacky with salt, grime, and something that may or may not be powdered eggs. The sun is relentless, baking everything in sight, including your ration, except one item. The D Ration Bar is untouched by the inferno. You pull it from your pack and stare at it like it's some cursed relic. The edges are as crisp as the day it was packaged. No melting, no softening. It looks like a museum exhibit on industrial food. You press your thumb against it. Nothing. It's less food and more inert object. You wonder if it could double as a coaster or a doorstop. And that was exactly the point. The D Bar was engineered not to melt, period. The requirement from the War Department was very specific. Must withstand 120 degrees without losing structural integrity. To put that in perspective, most chocolate begins to wilt around 85 degrees. The D Bar, it could survive inside a soldier's helmet, on the dashboard of a tank, or in the tropical heat of Guadalcanal. Historians still marvel at the chemistry. The cocoa butter was blended with oat flour and sugar in such a dry ratio that the end result had the consistency of hard clay. The process required pressing it with hydraulic equipment until it achieved something close to food-grade concrete. A chemist might call it brilliant. A soldier would call it a challenge. And the heat resistance had one major trade-off: mouthfeel. There wasn't any. The bar didn't melt in your mouth. It didn't soften with body heat. It just sat there, stubbornly resisting every attempt to turn it into nourishment. You once heard a guy say, "It's the only chocolate that fights back." But as much as you resent its texture and taste, you can't help but admire its durability. In a war where everything breaks, guns jam, boots split, letters get soaked, the D Bar endures. There's a strange comfort in that. One night, during a supply shortage, you have to eat one as your entire dinner. It takes 45 minutes. You chew slowly, pausing often, not for the taste, but to rest your jaw. At some point, it becomes meditative, a weird kind of ritual. By the end, you feel not full, but not empty either. Like you just completed a silent conversation with something immovable and lost. You once heard about a bar left in a jeep for 3 weeks in North Africa. When they finally unwrapped it, it looked exactly the same. Someone made a joke about radioactive properties. The bar still got eaten. What choice did they have? And here's a curious historical footnote. The D Ration Bar never spoiled. Not really. Due to its ultra-low moisture content and protective wrapping, it could last years, even decades, in storage. Some bars found in old depots long after the war ended were technically still edible. Emphasis on technically. Scientists later studied it as part of early space food experiments. That's right, the D-Bar helped lay the groundwork for astronaut rations. So next time someone complains about freeze-dried lasagna in zero gravity, just remind them, at least it's not a D Ration bar. Still, there were limits. While the bar itself was invincible, the human digestive system less so. Which brings us to a rather uncomfortable topic, the side effects. Some soldiers developed what they lovingly called choco-lock. Others experienced, let's say, accelerated evacuation. It depended on how desperate you were and how often you turned to that little brown brick as a primary food source. You remember a week in the jungle with nothing but D-bars, hardtack, and tepid water. By day 5, your squad collectively agreed to rotate who had to eat the bar that day, like it was a cursed talisman. A superstition began to form. Whoever eats the D-bar gets hit with rain the next day. Was it true? No. Did it feel true? Absolutely. Eventually, you start hearing tales of soldiers who mailed their D-bars home as jokes. One guy wrote on the wrapper, "To Mom, this is what they feed us. Please send peanut butter or dynamite." Despite it all, the bar persisted. It was reliable. Predictable? Ugly, yes, but immortal. A cockroach in candy form. And in a world where even maps lied to you, and the terrain shifted underfoot, there was something almost heroic in that. You may not love the D Ration Bar, but you respect it, because in a war built on uncertainty, at least one thing always shows up. Hard, dry, and exactly the same as yesterday. Just like you. It's another gray morning in the field, and you're staring at the D Ration Bar like it owes you an apology. By now, you've made peace with its taste. Kind of. But one question still haunts you, bouncing around your helmet like a mosquito at bedtime. Why did they make it this awful on purpose? You'd think it was a mistake, a factory error. Maybe the guy mixing the ingredients sneezed and doubled the oat flour. But no, they meant for it to be this bad. And here's where the story gets even stranger. The original military directive stated very clearly that the chocolate should not be too appetizing. Why? Because if it were delicious, soldiers would eat it like a snack, immediately, with joy, maybe even all in one sitting. And then, when they were actually starving in combat or stuck in a remote outpost, they'd have nothing left. So they decided to weaponize psychology. You don't just eat the D-bar, you endure it. It's not there to comfort you. It's there to remind you. This is war. You are not on vacation. You are not at a soda shop in Indiana. You are thousands of miles from home. And if you want sweet relief, you'd better earn it. Historians still argue about this design philosophy. Was it brilliant behavioral science or institutional cruelty with a powdered cocoa finish? Supporters of the idea point out that the bar worked. Soldiers didn't gorge themselves. They saved it for when they truly needed it. One psychologist called it palatability deterrence, making a food just good enough to eat, but bad enough that you'll only do it in desperation. Kind of like dating someone you're not sure about, because all your friends moved away. And then there's the other side of the debate. The critics who say the military misunderstood the importance of morale. After all, food isn't just fuel. It's emotion. It's nostalgia. It's the one moment in your day where you might remember who you are underneath the mud and the uniform. Give a soldier a good meal, they argue, and you restore more than energy. You restored dignity. You once met an old lieutenant who claimed the D Bar saved his life. He was stranded for 2 days behind enemy lines, with no food except a single bar. He said he took tiny bites, one every hour, and sang songs to himself to distract from the taste. By the end, he said, I hated it so much that I got angry enough to survive. Maybe that was the plan all along. And if it was, well, maybe it worked. There's also another theory, more cynical, more whispered in supply lines than spoken aloud. The bar was designed to be non-theft worthy. Think about it. If you're packing crates full of rations, do you want soldiers sneaking extras, hoarding supplies, trading chocolate for contraband? No. You want them to leave it alone unless they truly need it. So you build something unstealable, and you succeed. No one's hoarding D-bars under their bunk. No one's scalping them for cigarettes. They are not a commodity. They are a last resort with a wrapper. It's utilitarianism in snack form. Still, the most loyal defenders of the bar don't work in kitchens. They're in logistics. Supply officers loved the D-bar. It was compact, durable, easy to ship, didn't spoil, didn't melt, didn't leak. It stacked neatly in crates and survived transport from Baltimore to Bataan. A logistical dream, a culinary nightmare. There's something brutally honest about that design ethos. The D Ration Bar wasn't there to make you smile. It was there to do its job, like a helmet, or a bayonet, or a man who doesn't talk much but always fixes the Jeep. And over time, you begin to appreciate that. Not because it tastes good, it doesn't, but because it's consistent. It never lies. It never pretends to be more than it is. It says, I am food, not comfort. Eat me when you have to. Survive, then move on. And somehow, in that message, there's strange encouragement. It doesn't coddle you. It pushes you forward, one chalky bite at a time. You wrap the remainder of your bar back up, stick it in your breast pocket. It'll still be there tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, until you need it. Because deep down, you understand now, the D-Bar isn't about eating. It's about endurance. You're on a patrol somewhere outside Bastogne, the cold gnawing through your boots like a persistent rat. Every breath fogs the air, and your fingers are so numb they might as well belong to someone else. The only warmth you can count on is buried deep in your pack. A D Ration Bar, rock hard and barely edible, but always there. Today, you're hungry. Not just snackish, not I could eat. You're real hungry. The kind of hunger that feels hollow, that echoes in your ribs. So you unwrap the bar, brace yourself, and take a bite. Then you wait, because now comes the other effect. You've heard it called different names in different units. Choco clog, battle bricks, the cement effect. But they all point to one truth. The D Ration Bar doesn't just test your jaw, it tests your plumbing. That's right. You're about to enter the gastrointestinal battlefield. Some soldiers claimed that eating a whole bar in one sitting caused days of internal negotiations. Others insisted it had the opposite effect, a rapid-fire evacuation procedure that took everyone by surprise. The reality? It varied from stomach to stomach. A roll of the digestive dice. You once saw a medic scrawl on the side of a field latrine, "Do not eat 2 D-bars in 24 hours unless you hate yourself." That warning wasn't exaggerated. The bar's ultra-dense oat flour and lack of moisture made it difficult for your body to process. Add in the dehydrating effects of the battlefield, lack of clean water, excessive sweating, and stress, and you've got a recipe for intestinal rebellion. One guy you knew swore the bar gave him what he called reverse hiccups, a mysterious abdominal sensation no doctor could explain. Another joked that chewing a D-bar should come with a waiver, may cause temporary existential dread and permanent chewing fatigue. Historians have noted that the D-bar wasn't just a food item. It was an unintended study in emergency nutrition versus human digestion. Modern military dietitians look back on it like a relic from a time when food was more about shelf life than digestive harmony. And yet, no one ever stopped eating them. Because when you're cold and starving and the mess tent is a mile away and full of mushy cabbage and powdered beef, the D-Bar is something. It's compact. It's dependable. It doesn't lie to you. But that doesn't mean you like it. In fact, over time, the bar becomes the butt of 1,000 jokes. One sergeant once stood in front of the company holding a D-Bar and a rock and said, "Men, today we test which is harder." He threw the bar at a tree. It bounced. The rock, it cracked in half. There were whispers that the Germans had intercepted crates of the bar, tried them, and filed a protest with the Geneva Convention. Not true, but the rumor made the rounds more than once. You even heard one guy say that if you dropped a D-Bar from a low-flying plane, it could dent a helmet. That same guy claimed to have thrown one at a wild boar in Italy. The boar ran. The bar remained. But then, sometimes the bar helps. You remember a day when everything went wrong. Rations didn't show up. Tempers flared, and the rain wouldn't stop. Someone passed around a D-Bar and broke it into pieces. Each man got a bite. No one enjoyed it. No one smiled. But something softened in the silence because it was shared. It was a reminder that even when the world stripped you bare of warmth, of comfort, of privacy, you could still offer someone something, even if it was awful, even if it tasted like pressed regret. That moment sticks with you because you realize the D-Bar isn't just food. It's a kind of strange, chewy communion, a symbol of survival in its most basic form. And yes, the after effects might make you curse it later. But for now, it's energy, it's calorie, it's enough. You finish the last bite slowly, like a soldier chewing a piece of history. You rub your stomach and mutter a quiet prayer that your insides will be kind. Because let's face it, you didn't survive a minefield just to lose a battle in your own gut. You're sitting under a half-collapsed tent made of patched canvas, the mud reaching the ankles of your boots, and the rain thudding on your helmet like a drum with no rhythm. Someone hands you a tin cup of instant coffee, lukewarm at best. You take a sip, then reach into your pack for the one thing that's always there, like a wartime reflex, the D Ration Bar. But today, there's a twist. You're trading with a British unit, camped just across the clearing. And as part of the exchange, your cigarettes for their biscuits, you catch sight of something magical. A British chocolate ration bar, Cadbury, smooth, dark, and wrapped in foil that gleams in the dull light like a promise. You hold your D-Bar in one hand, the British bar in the other, like you've just found out that chocolate has a twin, and yours was raised by wool. Let's talk about the rivalry. During WOT, every nation had its own version of military chocolate, and while none of them were luxurious, the differences were significant. The British bar was, shockingly, actual chocolate, still dense and shelf-stable, yes, but it was allowed to taste like food. Soldiers described it as plain but decent, like something your aunt would sneak you before dinner. It melted in the mouth, imagine that, and didn't come with a dental hazard warning. Then there were the Canadians. Their chocolate rations were similar to Britain's, but often came with extras, wrapped in wax paper, sometimes accompanied by biscuits, and with just enough flavor to remind you life wasn't entirely made of gray wool and machine oil. Meanwhile, the Americans, you got the D-Bar, a bar that could bounce off helmets, that doubled as a defensive tool, that, if you believed the rumors, once survived being run over by a jeep. Historians note this difference as more than just culinary. It was philosophical. British military doctrine leaned toward sustaining morale through small comforts, tea, biscuits, recognizable food. The American approach leaned into functional nutrition and industrial efficiency. One focused on keeping spirits high, the other focused on keeping blood sugar up. And you're caught in the middle, literally. One of your squad mates trades a pair of wool socks for a single British bar. He unwraps it with the care of a man handling sacred relics. You watch as he breaks it in half, offering you a piece. It glistens in the cold, rich and dark. You bite in, and for a moment, the war fades. It's not sweet like home, but it melts. It's soft. It tastes like chocolate. You look down at your D Ration Bar. Still hard, still grayish-brown, still something between chalk and commitment. The contrast isn't just about food. It's about experience. You start thinking about how different soldiers fight the same war under different expectations. The guy across from you may carry the same rifle, duck the same bullets, but when he reaches into his pack, he finds a bit of mercy, and that difference matters. One British corporal tells you his unit used chocolate bars as a morale tool. We gave one to a bloke right after he watched his best friend get shot. Sat beside him in silence, broke the bar in half and gave him a piece. Didn't say anything, didn't need to. You nod. You've done the same. It's not about sugar, it's about presence. A pause, a reminder of life before all this. Even so, the American approach had its supporters. You met a quartermaster who swore the D-Bar's resilience saved thousands of lives. It's not food, he said. It's fuel with flavor. That's the point. You didn't argue, because he was right, even if it tasted like boot polish. There were also stories of American soldiers trying to trade their bars with local, often with disastrous results. One GI offered his D-Bar to a child in France, who took one bite, spat it out dramatically, and ran off yelling, "Non, non, c'est poison." Word spread. At one point, "No trade D-Bar" was a common note in many field journals. Still, the comparisons continued throughout the war. In letters home, soldiers described foreign rations with envy. "Their bar melts," one wrote. "Ours doubles as trench repair material." But here's the strange twist. Many British and Canadian troops envied you. Not your chocolate, but your supply chains, your volume, your access. They could get better chocolate, but less of it. And in war, quantity sometimes trumps quality. So yes, their chocolate tasted better, but your pockets were never empty. And somehow, that mattered too. You're sitting on a splintered crate, the kind that once held ammo but now serves as a seat, table, and emotional support object. The air smells of gun oil and damp wool. Your boots are caked in something unidentifiable. Across from you, a man carefully unwraps something that looks like chocolate, but doesn't act like it. He slides it toward you wordlessly. You already know what it is, a booby-trapped chocolate bar. No, seriously. Tonight's conversation drifts toward rumors, half-truths that swirl through every battalion. But this one's different, because this story, this one is real. During World War II, British intelligence designed a chocolate bar laced with explosives. Not a metaphor. The bar looked like a standard, delicious treat, wrapped in shiny foil, stamped with a familiar logo. But underneath the outer shell was a high-powered detonator, activated when the bar was broken in half. It was meant to be left in enemy territory, on a desk, in a drawer, beside a teacup. One snap, and boom, you stare at the mock-up in front of you, a harmless replica. It's lighter than expected, hollow inside, but that's what made it brilliant. This wasn't just weaponized sugar. It was a lesson in temptation, in misdirection. It weaponized comfort, made sweetness a threat, and in its way, it reminded you of the D-Bar, though the D-Bar never exploded. Not physically, at least. What's fascinating is how chocolate walked the razor's edge between survival and sabotage. One moment, it's a soldier's last lifeline. The next, it's a trap, a Trojan horse in silver foil. Historians still debate how many of these explosive bars were made. Some say dozens, others hundreds. Few, if any, were ever used in the field. But the idea itself caused a ripple through Allied and Axis forces alike. If you couldn't trust chocolate, what could you trust? You think about this often, about how something as innocent as a treat became part of warfare, about how hunger and fear tangled together, about how even joy could be turned into a weapon. One day you hear a story from a French resistance fighter. She says a Nazi officer confiscated chocolate from a local child, suspecting it was British-made, not because it looked suspicious, but because he'd heard stories. Stories that one bite could be your last. The irony? The D Ration Bar probably couldn't explode if you tried. A match wouldn't ignite it. A hammer wouldn't dent it. But the idea that chocolate itself could betray you, that lingered. So now every bar you see carries extra weight. Even the good ones, even the real one. You break them slowly, carefully. And maybe that's why the D-Bar, terrible as it was, started to feel safer. Because at least it never lied to you. It was awful, but it was honest. And in war, that's rare. Still, the thought stays with you. What does it mean when something designed for sweetness can become part of violence? What does it say about us, our ingenuity, our desperation, that we'd turn dessert into deception? You don't have answers, just crumbs. Crumbs of a story that, like so many in this war, feels impossible until it happens. Later that night, you unwrap your D-Bar again, hold it up to the firelight, inspect the corners. No wires, no charges, no tricks. Just the same old punishment brick you've come to know. You take a bite. It's terrible, but at least it won't kill you. You're in the barracks now, off duty, finally dry for once. Relatively speaking, your boots are propped on a crate, and your uniform smells like smoke, old rain, and the persistent ghost of canned beans. One of the guys is telling a story, hands gesturing wildly, while another sharpens a knife on the edge of his mess kit. Then someone says it. They should have been arrested for making that thing. Everyone laughs. You know exactly what he's talking about. The D Ration Bar. But tonight the jokes go deeper. They aren't just about how hard it is, or how it tastes like cocoa-infused regret. They're about the ethics, the idea that someone, somewhere, thought this was acceptable, or even merciful. Historians still argue about it. Not just the taste, or the texture, or the trauma, but the principle behind it. Was the D Ration Bar a brilliant survival innovation, or borderline edible abuse? Let's weigh it out. On the one hand, it was engineered with battlefield conditions in mind. It didn't melt. It didn't spoil. It provided calories in a pinch, and it could survive a war zone better than most humans. That's something. But on the other hand, it was designed to be nearly inedible. It caused digestive issues. It damaged morale, and it became the symbol of everything bland, brutal, and bureaucratically indifferent about military food. You once heard a lieutenant mutter, "If we gave this to prisoners, it'd be a war crime." No one disagreed, and yet no one stopped making it. Why? Because in war, success is measured in statistics, in calories delivered, in units moved, in packages that survive the jungle, the desert, the ocean. Taste doesn't factor into that equation. Comfort, that's a luxury. In fact, the bar was considered so successful by logistical standards that the military doubled down. After the D ration came the tropical bar, an improved version meant for even hotter climate. Spoiler alert, it wasn't better. It was just more of the same, with a new name. One private in your unit compared the D-Bar to his stepfather. Always there, totally joyless and impossible to get rid of. But here's the thing. Over time, it became more than a bar. It became a symbol, a kind of unspoken inside joke, a test, a shared experience that connected everyone from generals to privates. It didn't matter where you fought. Europe, the Pacific, North Africa. If you had the D-Bar, you had something in common. That unity, that mattered. Because in a war made of division, between ranks, branches, borders, there was at least one thing everyone agreed on. This chocolate was terrible, and yet weirdly comforting. Years later, some veterans claimed to miss the D-Bar, not for the taste, but for what it represented. Simplicity, grit, A time when the worst part of the day might have been chewing through a chalky rectangle under a bullet-riddled tree. It's funny how the brain works, how memory turns even pain into something warm, how the bar you once cursed becomes the one thing that reminds you of people you loved, lost, and laughed with under the worst skies imaginable. You think about that tonight. You unwrap a bar slowly, watching the way the paper folds crackle in the firelight. The scent, bland, dry, familiar, hits you like déjà vu. You take a bite, close your eyes, and feel it all come rushing back. Not just the bad, not just the jokes, but the truth. You survived, and so did the bar. It's past midnight, and the barracks are quieter now. A few men are asleep, snoring into damp pillows. Others lie awake, staring at the rafters like they might find answers in the knots of the wood. You, as always, are somewhere in between, restless, reflective, and chewing. Of course, a D Ration Bar. It's what you do when sleep won't come and silence feels too loud. Tonight, someone tosses out a question from the dark. Why the hell did we call it a chocolate bar? And just like that, another round of nicknames begin. Choco Brick, Fudge Grenade, Death by Cocoa, Teethbreaker Deluxe, the Brown Bastard. That one stuck the longest. GI slang is as creative as it is cruel, and the D-Bar was the perfect target. Because if war makes soldiers poets, bad chocolate makes them comedians. One guy said biting into it felt like chewing on compressed guilt. Another swore he used one to fix a jammed rifle bolt. You didn't believe him until he did it again, and the names weren't just jokes. They were coping mechanisms. You couldn't change the bar, you couldn't make it taste better, but you could name it into submission. That gave you power. Even the way guys stored the bar had evolved. Some wrapped it in a sock to soften it. Others left it under their helmet during the day to warm it slightly. One guy swore by holding it in his armpit for 20 minutes before eating. You didn't ask follow-up questions. You once met a paratrooper who used a D-bar as part of his training regimen, biting off a chunk every time he failed a drill. Self-punishment as motivation. It worked. He became one of the best shots in your unit. But the slang? That was universal. In the Pacific, someone called it Hershey's hostage. In Italy, it was brown chalk. In France, le béton sucré, sweet concrete. Even the medics got in on it. They used fragments of the bar as stand-ins during first aid training. If you can inject through this, one said, you can inject through anything. And then there were the accidental encounters. You remember a dog in North Africa, someone's unofficial mascot, who got hold of an unwrapped bar. It took 2 days for him to forgive you, 3 to poop again. Later back in camp, you tried making your own version of the bar. You crushed hardtack, mixed it with instant coffee and cocoa powder, and pressed it into a tin. The result, marginally worse, but somehow yours. You called it the Freedom Brick. Historians today call these stories field folklore, but they miss something. These weren't just jokes. They were tiny revolts, biting back at bureaucracy, claiming control over what little you could, because you couldn't choose where you fought. You couldn't choose who died beside you. You couldn't even choose your meals, but you could rename your misery. And in doing so, you reclaimed it, turned it into something that belonged to you, not to Washington, not to the generals, not to some factory in Pennsylvania, to you. That mattered more than anyone knew. Now in the dark, someone breaks off a piece of their bar and passes it silently to another bunk. No one says, thank you. They don't have to. It's understood. You take another bite. Still terrible, still dry, still there. Like the war, like your friends, like memory. And for the first time, you smile, because you realize something kind of beautiful. Even the worst things, when shared, become a little easier to chew. Dawn creeps in like a tired whisper, casting gray light across the barracks. You're already awake. Most of you are. Sleep doesn't cling long out here. You're sitting by your kit, trying to tie a fraying bootlace when you hear the sound. A faint rustle. A curse under breath. Then, again? Seriously? You look up. Another unopened D Ration Bar. Standard issue. Same dull wrapping. Has just been torn open to reveal something very unexpected. It's already been bitten. You all gather around, squinting. Yep, teeth marks. Small one. A clean curve like a rodent, or maybe a child. But the bar is sealed. The outer wrapping is untouched. How? It's not the first time. Someone mutters, "I've had 3 like that this month." Another replies, "Thought it was just me." You start hearing the stories, quietly, almost embarrassed. Bars that arrived with bites taken out. Others broken in half, despite sealed wrappers. Some discolored, others sticky. It's not sabotage, not the enemy. It's something far more mundane, and somehow more unsettling. Supply chain failure. Maybe it happened in the warehouse. Maybe rats got in. Maybe some poor factory worker took a bite, hated it, and just repackaged the thing out of spite. Who knows? Historians would later theorize that some D-bars rejected for quality control were still shipped out anyway. The theory? They figured soldiers wouldn't notice, or wouldn't complain. After all, the bar was nearly inedible to begin with, and they weren't wrong. Most of the time, you didn't notice a missing corner. You weren't eating it for pleasure. You were eating it because your stomach growled and there was nothing else. But this one looked like it had been sampled, judged, and then returned. The implications were somehow worse than a bad bar. Someone else, something else, had bitten into your survival food and decided to stop. You feel weirdly offended. Later that day, you decide to ask the supply sergeant about it. He barely looks up. Count yourself lucky. At least it's not the one that came with a button inside. You blink. He nods. Deadpan. Guy bit into a shirt button, lodged in the center. Chocolate wrapped around it like it grew there. Turns out, quality control in wartime production wasn't exactly surgical. Factories were cranking out bars at incredible speed, thousands per day, with minimal oversight. Mistakes happened. Contaminants slipped in. Sometimes it wasn't sabotage. It was just exhaustion, chaos. The human cost of mass feeding an army. And it wasn't just D-bars. Canned goods came with rust. Coffee packets were moldy. Once you opened a can labeled meat hash, that was clearly not meat hash. You closed it quickly, said a prayer, moved on. But the D-bar, it was personal, because you already didn't want to eat it. You were forcing yourself. So when it arrived pre-chewed, it felt like an insult to your effort. One guy compared it to writing a bad breakup letter, then having someone edit it for you, worse than getting dumped. Still, you did what everyone else did. You shrugged. You broke off the part with teeth marks. You shared the rest, or tossed it, or used it to prop up your cot, because what else could you do? You didn't have the luxury of demanding better. You didn't have Yelp. You had wartime chocolate, and all the baggage that came with it. Later that night, you think about that chewed bar. You wonder, who bit into it first? What did they think? Did they spit it out, just like you almost did that first time? You imagine some tired worker in a factory line in 1943. Maybe they were hungry, curious. Maybe they didn't believe the rumors, so they took a bite. And then they understood. So they slipped the bar back onto the conveyor belt, wrapped it with military precision, and passed along the lesson. This isn't chocolate. This is war. The snow is falling sideways now. You're on night watch, outside a depot, wrapped in layers of scratchy wool, breath fogging in the frigid air like little ghosts escaping your mouth. There's not much to do except stamp your boots, listen for movement, and try not to think about how hungry you are. You reach into your coat pocket. Yep, still there. The same old D Ration Bar. You could probably use it to hammer in tent stakes. But tonight, you don't eat it. You just hold it. It's strange how something you used to loathe can become familiar. So familiar, in fact, that you almost don't want to eat it. Not because it's precious, but because it's constant. And in this war, that's rare. This is the part they don't write about in the manuals. The relationship you form with the things you carry. Your canteen, your extra socks, that one letter from home, and yes, this little brown rectangle that has followed you through mud, fire, frost, and despair. Over time, the D bar becomes something more than food. It becomes a companion, a symbol, an artifact of this strange in-between world you live in, suspended between chaos and routine. And in that sense, it's no longer about taste. It's about memory. You remember one time, on a train convoy through southern France, when the car hit a curve too hard and your pack spilled open. You were frantic, thinking you'd lost something important, your compass, your field manual. But the first thing you checked for? The D bar. Why? You're not sure. Maybe because it had been with you longer than some of the guys in your unit. Maybe because you'd stared at it in a dozen foxholes, wondering if you'd live long enough to finish it. Or maybe because at some point, the bar stopped being a joke and started being a thread. The thread that stitched all these places together. Historians sometimes describe war through weapons, politics, strategy. But if you asked a soldier what war tasted like, they'd say the D Ration Bar, not because it was delicious, because it was always there, in your coat, in your kit, in your mind. It became shorthand for all the little compromises of military life. You want chocolate, you get chalk. You want home, you get orders. You want control, you get routine. And yet, you endure. You break off a piece and chew slowly, letting the gritty sweetness spread across your tongue like old sandpaper. It's terrible, but now the taste doesn't revolt you. It grounds you, because every bite says, you've been here before, you're still here now, you'll be here tomorrow. And in a war full of shattered timelines, that's powerful. Later, in a moment of quiet, you unwrap the last full D bar in your rations and carve something small into it with your knife. Just 3 letters, a name, someone you lost last winter. He hated the bar more than anyone, said it reminded him of Grandma's basement if you licked the wallpaper. But he always carried one, never missed a chance to share it. Now it's your turn. You place the carved bar inside your footlocker, beneath your extra shirt, and a snapshot from home. Not to eat, just to keep. You don't know what will happen next, where the war will send you, what you'll lose. But that bar, it'll stay, like a time capsule, a memory in waxy paper. Because for all its flaws, its brutal texture, its weaponized blandness, its reputation, the D Ration Bar is yours. And that means something, even if no one else will ever understand. It's spring now. Somewhere on a hillside in southern Germany, the trees are blooming. The air is cool, but the frost has finally loosened its grip. You're no longer counting minutes under fire. You're counting days until home. The war is ending. You can feel it, not in orders, not in radio chatter, but in the silence. And yet even now the D Ration Bar is in your pocket, not because you need it anymore. The supply lines are strong again. You've had real meals, real bread, even coffee that doesn't come from a tin. But there it is, the final one, still sealed, still hard, still shaped like disappointment and survival all at once. You sit down beneath a tree, unbuckle your belt, and pull out the bar. You stare at it for a long time. It's odd how this one little object, so unloved, so ridiculed, has carried more weight than it was ever meant to bear. It wasn't just food. It was proof that you made it through, that you lived long enough to still be hungry. You turn it over in your hand, feeling the edges. They've softened a bit from the heat of your body, but it's still solid. You could probably throw it against the tree and knock loose a bird. Instead, you unwrap it slowly. The paper crinkles like a memory. That same waxy olive drab packaging, the same faint smell of cocoa and dust. You take a bite, just a small one. It still tastes awful, but now it tastes like a story, your story. And with every chew, you remember. You remember the man who broke his in half and gave you a piece during a cold watch. The time you used a corner of one to wedge open a jammed ammo box. The night you hid a bar in your boot and forgot it until 2 weeks later. and it was still fine. The morning a kid traded you a drawing for a single square. The silent ritual of unwrapping, chewing, surviving. You remember the jokes, the curses, the nickname, and finally, the respect. Because what other food can say, it was carried into combat, cursed by thousands, hated by all, and yet never abandoned. The D Ration Bar was never your friend, but it was your companion, a monument to endurance, to design born of necessity, to the strange way soldiers grow attached to the very things they suffer with. You finish your last bite, slowly. It's gritty, dry, slightly metallic. You chase it with a sip of real water, cold, clear, and blessedly tasteless. And for the first time, you don't feel like you're choking it down. You feel like you're closing a chapter. You wrap the paper carefully, fold it, slip it into your journal, not as trash, but as tribute. Because the war may be over, but the things that kept you alive, however ridiculous, however bitter, deserve to be remembered. Just like the people, you stand, stretch, and walk back to camp, lighter now. Not because you're full, but because you're finished. And somewhere behind you, the last of the D Ration bars sits beneath a tree, uneaten, waiting for another war, or, hopefully, none at all. And now, as the camp fades from view and the stories settle like dust, let your breath slow. You've traveled through battles and barracks, followed the footsteps of soldiers who carried not just weapons, but burdens wrapped in wax paper. This wasn't a tale about chocolate, not really. It was about endurance, about finding meaning in the mundane, about how even the hardest, driest, least loved things can hold us together when everything else is falling apart. You may never taste a D Ration bar, but now you know its weight, its presence, its strange, stubborn loyalty. The way it sat in a soldier's pocket for days, waiting, not to delight, but to serve. Let that be a quiet reminder tonight, that not every comfort comes in sweetness, that not all survival stories are grand. Some are chewed slowly, in silence by firelight. So as your head sinks into the pillow and your breath begins to drift, imagine the crackle of a fire far away, the soft hum of voices, the rustle of a wax wrapper in tired hand, and know with certainty that you are safe, that you have made it through, that this night holds no bitterness, only peace. Rest easy, soldier of the mind. Tomorrow brings softness and warmth, and maybe something that melts.